Tonight's exciting program is with three wonderful bibliophiles who will share their favorite reads. And I've asked whether you need to have a piece of paper. You might want that, a piece of paper and a pencil. Kate Larson has been in bookstores since 1912, beginning at Books A Million, before heading to Liberty Bay Books in both, who had branches both in Poulsbo and Bremerton. She then moved to the Bank Square Books in Connecticut. And then happily for us, she moved back to Bremerton and bought the branch of Liberty Bay Books and changed the name to Ballast Book Company. Suzanne Selfors is a fifth-generation Bainbridge Islander who has written over 30 books for young readers. She is a recipient of the Washington State Book Award, the 6th Junior Library Guild Awards, and numerous other state awards. Her books have been national bestsellers and are published in over a dozen languages. That's really fine. In February 2020, she purchased Liberty Bay Books in downtown Poulsbo. And that was, of course, as you know, 1 month before COVID hit. And our third speaker is librarian Sarah Jaffa, and she is the adult fiction selector at the Kitsap Regional Library. She's going to be discussing about the library and the bookstore roles in building community around reading. She will also share some of her favorite genre picks. That's a wonderful topic. And I put it over to you, Karen, now.
All right. Well, welcome again to tonight's wonderful presentation. And a reminder that if you have questions for our presenters, to please put them in our chat. And our first presenter tonight will be Suzanne Selfors of Liberty Bay Books. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak for no longer than 15 minutes. I promise I'm going to watch the clock, maybe even less than 15 minutes. As was mentioned, I'm the new owner of Liberty Bay Books in downtown Poulsbo. And yes, I did. I bought it on February 1st when COVID was still a mysterious thing. And we went through 2 weeks of renovations, and it was like one of those television shows where you begin to peel back the wallpaper, and we discovered all sorts of treasures because it's a very old building. So it was 2 weeks of pretty intense renovations, and then we opened for one beautiful, blissful month, and then we had the state shut down. So we went into survival mode immediately. I can't say it's the most fun I've ever had, but I can say that I could probably teach a university level course in business survival skills. So, but the good news is that we're thriving, and it's because the staff has worked incredibly hard during all this. And it's also because we have the most amazing, loyal, passionate customers, people who love independent bookstores, love independent bookstores. And so I'm just so very grateful that the community has supported us through all this. Speaking of community, I was asked to mention a few fundraising drives we have going on right now at the store. Bookstores are considered to be community hubs, and that's one of the reasons why we've created 4 giving programs that benefit literacy nonprofits in our area. And if you go to our website, libertybaybooks.com, there's a button at the top that says donate to a literacy campaign, and that will explain more about them. They range from preschoolers in our local Head Start program who are homeless and from low income and at-risk families, all the way up to incarcerated women at the Purdy Correctional Center. So all of these programs, we raise money and then we buy brand new books that are given to these different populations. So last year, the campaigns were a huge success. We even had people who donated their stimulus checks so that we could buy these books. So we're hoping that we'll get some great response this year as well. So you go to the website, you can call us on the phone, you can stop into the store and fill out a campaign form and help us get books into people's hands this holiday season. Okay, I'm here to tell you about some books I'm excited about. And these books are going to be available at my bookstore. They'll also be available at Kate's down in And I'm really focused mostly on local authors. And so I'm going to give you some gift ideas. I'm going to start with this book called Facing the Mountain. And this has been out for a little bit, for a few months. You are all probably familiar with The Boys in the Boat. This is by Daniel James Brown. If you haven't read The Boys in the Boat, or you're looking for another gift idea, we always have it in stock. It's an incredible book about the University of Washington's rowing team and their participation in the Olympics in Nazi Germany. It's a great book. So this is his latest, called Facing the Mountain. And Daniel James Brown lives here in Western Washington. And this is about, gosh, I think it's 5 men. I can't remember quite off the top of my head, 4 or 5 Japanese American families. And while their families are incarcerated in camps, these men volunteered to join the special segment of the Japanese American Army during World War II, and they fought in Europe. And a couple of them, one was from Hawaii, and a couple of them were here from Western and from Eastern Washington. And it's a fascinating, I love his writing because it's, you know, we all know what it's like to pick up a history book that feels like a textbook, but he doesn't write that way. It's really a flowing story. And not only do we learn about these individual men, but we learn about their families. We learn about their wives and their daughters and what they were going through at home during this time too. So you have history readers, you have readers who love American history, who love Pacific Northwest history, World War II. This would be a great gift. It's not in paperback. It won't be in paperback for quite a while. It's in hardback. Facing the Mountain. Okay. The next one is called Home Waters. This is by David B. Williams. He's a friend of mine. He's a lovely man, and he is a writer and a naturalist and was a curator at the Burke Museum. And he's fascinated with our local history. He's written quite a few local history books. Again, he's the kind of writer who takes you on a journey and tells a wonderful story. Home Waters is about the history of Puget Sound, not just of the people, but also of the flora and the fauna. And he weaves it all together. And he begins with how did Puget Sound get his name? And then he moves to the volcanic forces that created the landscape that we live in, to the indigenous people, to the wars that were fought over this area, to the resources, the forest, herrings, salmon, gooey duck, orca, all that stuff. So it's really a lovely, lovely read. Once again, anybody who loves history, who loves natural science books, who loves anything that's local, nature writing, I recommend this book, Home Waters. Okay, let's see, next one is, okay, so this isn't a local writer. Actually, you know what? I didn't look up where she lives, so I'm not 100% sure, but this is a book, maybe somebody on the chat line will know. I didn't look up where this author lives, but I don't know this author. This is a book called Fuzz. This is a huge bestseller right now on the Pacific Northwest bestseller list. This cover kind of throws you off. You don't really know what this book is. I'm not sure I'm in love with this cover, but this is a very funny book. Mary Roach is a science journalist, and she's gotten the title of being America's funniest science writer. And one of the reviews said she's like spending time with a perfect dinner guest because she has all these amazing stories. And so this is more of a lighthearted collection of stories, which is always nice to have because then you can read it, you know, when at leisure, when you feel like it, and you don't have to read it in order. You can read whatever story strikes your mood. These are stories really basically based on the human-animal conflicts, when humans and wild animals come into contact with each other and the mayhem that can often result in that. She writes about sort of these absurdities that happen. And so for your, like, let me read you just one of the titles of one of her stories. And her other books are really great too. She has a book called Bonk, The Curious Coupling of Science and Sex. And another one called Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers. So she writes a whole variety of interesting things. But for instance, like one of her stories in here is about the gulls of St. Peter. and how the Vatican went about trying to get rid of some gulls that were making a mess on their rooftops. And what happens when murder is done. There's one here called "The Elephant in the Room: Manslaughter by the Pound," when an elephant accidentally killed somebody. So anyway, these are very funny. This is a great gift for any science and nature readers who want something a little bit more lighthearted. Okay, next. Okay, now this is an interesting book that I just just found out about this week, and this is not going to be available anywhere online. And Kate probably doesn't have this in her store yet, but we're going to make sure that she gets copies. This is a book called Notes from the Garden. And Madeline Wild was a journalist who wrote for 2 decades for a little newspaper called the Queen Anne and Magnolia News. And it was a small community newspaper, and it was published. Her publisher was a man named Mike Dillon, who lives in Indianola. And so she wrote from her Queen Anne garden, her observations about the seasons and about her gardens, and sometimes about food and cooking. And he always tried to convince her to gather her essays together for a book. And she felt very shy about doing that. She didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so when she passed away a couple years ago, he decided that he was going to do it in her memory. So he gathered all of her columns from that newspaper and put them together in this book called Notes from the Garden. And these are really lovely, very short, very sweet, beautiful essays. So for any of your gardening friends, this would be a wonderful gift, especially because it's so special and you can't get this online. So we will have plenty of copies. And like I said, we'll make sure that Kate gets access to this book as well. Okay, Notes from the Garden. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple children's books here. And this is by, this children's book is called Dear Little One. And this is by Nina Lawden. And Nina is lives up on Lemony Island, and she's a local author who's written many books for kids, many very popular books. This just came out, so I really doubt that any of the children in your lives have this book yet, because it was just released. I think this is a beautiful book. This is a beautiful gift book for anyone who has a new baby or anyone who's a new parent. It's just a book. It's very, very sweet, encouraging kids to explore the natural world and encouraging them to be grateful. And like, I'm going to show you one of the drawings, but the words here say, welcome, little one, your time on earth has just begun. And every single illustration has a lot of details that can be explored by children. And they're just really beautiful illustrations in these lovely jewel tones. So we've got this at the front of the house, and I recommend this. This is a lovely gift book. And then one last kid's book is this book. This is not by a local author, but this is also a new and a very unique story. Now, I don't normally care about celebrity writing books written by celebrities. I don't care about that at all. And I didn't even realize that this book was written by a celebrity, but Aubrey Plaza was an actress who was on Parks and Recreation.
She's not very good.
I just love this book, The Legend of the Christmas Witch. And it's a story. It's very much like Grimm and Anderson in that vein. It's not for young readers. It's definitely, I would say, for a little bit older, because it is a fairy tale, and there is a lot of words, a lot of writing on each page. But they created the story of Santa Claus's twin sister. They're separated at birth, and she spends her life trying to find him. So it's just a really fascinating, really unique fairy tale. I really loved it, and I love the illustrations. They're also very, very beautiful. So this is also brand new. So this is probably not something that the kids in your lives have read yet or have their hands on yet. So this is another book that I recommend for.
No, she's from Liberty Bay.
Somebody is speaking and they don't have their microphone muted. just FYI. Okay, and then I wanted to show you guys something to get you excited. This is one of the wonderful things about being owning a bookstore is that we get books before anybody else gets them. And one of the books I just got a hold of is David Guterson's next book. And this will be out in January. And I'm about halfway through. And I'm excited to say that for those of you who love Snow Falling on Cedars, and he went on to write a lot of other things that were very different from Snow Falling on Cedars. This goes back to his roots of a courtroom drama. And it's based on a true courtroom drama. And it's really good. I'm really loving it. So if you are excited about this book, we're going to have signed copies. And I know Kate will too, because David's going to go around and sign copies. So call us or email us and let us know that you'd like us to reserve one for you. And we will. So January, I can't remember the date, 11th or 22nd, something like that. But that's when this will be out. So I hope that I gave you some wonderful ideas for the history and the local enthusiasts in your lives and 2 wonderful children's books. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kate at Ballast Books, and she's going to give you some recommendations from her bookstore.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for that handout. That garden poem book sounds amazing. I definitely need to get copies of that in the store for sure. So thank you for that. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my favorite gifts books of the year. But first I'll mention that I did just buy this store from Suzanne Selfors in June of this year. I was the original manager of this location. So I was the founding manager when it was a little pop-up store that never left and never deflated, unpopped, it just kind of stayed. So here we are 6 years later, and now it is just me and a couple of employees. So we love it here. We love Bremerton. I'm so happy to be back here. I was managing the store in Connecticut when my partner had to move, and very glad to be back. So one thing we're doing for the holidays is we're doing a book donation drive for books in Spanish or bilingual for children with Kayak. That's the Kitsap Immigration Assistance Center. We have a wish list on our website on the right-hand side. If you scroll down a little bit, it will say donate books for the holidays and have their logo on it. We have had a great response from that. It's been so wonderful to see the people coming out, caring about their community members. And I'm going to move on to the books because I have a lot of them to recommend, and I will try my best to stay at 15 minutes as well. So first off is a cookbook. This is called Cooking at Home. It's by David Chang and Priya Krishna. So David Chang is the founder of Home Cuckoo, and last year he had a memoir come out called Eat Peach that was very popular. And then Priya's book was Indian-ish, and that was also extremely popular. Great gift. And this is both of them together, learning to cook at home during the pandemic, and love their microwaves, which is fun. For a nonfiction book, I love that Priya talked about Curiosity Stream, because this is actually one of the creators on that platform. He wrote this huge book about your immune system. So the fun thing about this, though, although it took him like 10 years to write and is very, very thorough, it has fun, like infographic style with some humor throughout. So anybody who is like an engineer, anybody who's interested in biology will love this book. Then we have a biography. This is by Ivana Lynch. She is actually Luna Lovegood in a Harry Potter series. So she wrote about her time growing up, dealing with some body image issues, some eating disorders, and how she's learned to love herself and move on and embrace life. Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket. It is the same Lemony Snicket as A Series of Unfortunate Events. This little novella is written for adults, but it is in that Series of Unfortunate Events style. So it's very wordy, witty, fun, lots of big words with definitions following and explanations. And it starts out with Lemony Snicket eating breakfast and finds out a note in his pocket saying that somebody has poisoned you for breakfast. You've just eaten poison. So he goes on a little journey to figure out who might have poisoned him. Next up is a mystery. So I have my grandma read all of my mysteries for me, and she tells me which ones are good. And this one is by Chris Hadfield. It's The Apollo Murders. She saved this one for last out of a batch I sent her a while ago because she didn't think that she would like it. Chris Hadfield's actually an astronaut, and she thought that this would be a very technical book and she wouldn't be very into it. But it was her favorite book of the last few years of all of the books that I've ever sent her. She's loved this one the most. She said it was great. This guy is just a genius at pacing. It's fast and it keeps going and it just keeps being very, very exciting. And it's kind of neat that he's an actual astronaut as well. So this book is called Light from Uncommon Stars by Ricky Yoki. This is one of the more beautiful books that I've ever read in my life. It is very wonderful setting, heavy book. So it's in LA. There's great descriptions of the food. There's a wonderful exploration of the diversity of LA, and then also a lot about trans runaway character in this book, speaking to kind of why people should care about trans rights and support them. And it is a fiction book, but it's very, very good. This book here is one of my employee Miracle's favorite books of this year to recommend to people. It's A Marvelous Light by Freya Marksy. Saying that wrong probably, but we'll have a link sent out to you guys after the event with all of the books on it. So this book is like Downton Abbey meets The Magicians and Bridgerton all combined. So it's English gentleman solving a mystery. There's curses. It's very fun. We have Iron Widow by Zirn J. Zhao. They are Canadian. It's their first book. And Iron Widow is actually, Zirn J. Zhao is actually a first-generation immigrant from China. And they wrote a book that combines the story of the only female empress of China, who started out as a concubine and kind of slept her way into power. But wrote a book about it, combining it with mecha. So it's very intense and action-packed, but it is clean. There's not really any descriptions of anything that you couldn't give to a young adult. So this is a great recommendation for anybody in like ages 14 to mid-20s, even 30s, I would say. It's so unique and so fun. And her author photo, or their author photo, is a onesie. So if you have anybody a little bit quirky in your life, they'll love that book. Next up, we have a Kitsap resident, Kendara Blake. She wrote a book called All These Bodies, which is based on a real life story of this murder spree in the 50s, where it started out in Nebraska, I believe, and then traveled around through the country. And when they finally caught up with them, it was this older guy and a 14-year-old girl. So she wrote a book inspired by that story from the 14-year-old girl's side of it. So it's about the son of the detective who's interviewing her and trying to figure out what actually happened with all of these murders. They are called the Bloodless Murders. They always find bodies with zero blood in them, completely drained, and nobody knows how they did it. That one is definitely a little spookier, but it is written for a young adult audience, so a teenager would read it. This one is Skin of the Sea by Sasha Bowen. This is a book that a lot of people are so excited for. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but I'm one of those people. It is The Little Mermaid, but retold with a Western African mythology bent. So it's very cool, unique take on the kind of a more classic story. Got a couple picture books. This one, A Home Under the Stars by Andy Trumosser. He's actually a Seattle resident. He was here a while ago for Art Walk and illustrated these lovely little signature pages. So this is completely all drawn by Andy. And this story is a gorgeous little story about a boy who's moved to the city from the country and he can't see the stars and he's very upset about it. So he rips up some paper stars that his mom's hang up to try to make him feel more at home, and then ends up going on this fantastical journey to try to find the North Star. And then we have Chain Sings by Amanda Gorman, illustrated by Lauren Long. This is a book that I'm sure everybody's heard of, but it is a fantastic book. So this picture book is just a very simple, sweet, good for younger readers because there's not too many words on the page, but it's about celebrating our differences and working towards a better future. And please put questions in the chat so that we can recommend other books for you too. I would love that. I have a whole stack of other things here that I don't necessarily have time to talk about. But now I will hand it over to Sarah and she will talk to you a little bit about her picks.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well tonight. I'm Sarah. I am the adult selector librarian at Kitsap Regional Library. The plan tonight was to talk a little bit about how libraries and bookstores are really partners in building community around reading and literacy. I have a feeling that this is something that this group already knows. But in terms of what the research shows is that bookstores and libraries, both of them are places that are trusted resources for a number of different people within the community. They have in the past been what's called a third place. So not work, not home, but a place of gathering where ideas can be expressed, community can be built. During COVID times, that shifted to an online environment, but it still actually ends up being true, just in a slightly different way. And as we get back to more and more in-person events and being open in larger capacity, we really are beginning to see that third place vibe come about again. The other thing that people often think about is the role of bookstores and libraries in discovery. And what I mean by that is there has been discussion is like, well, if people use the library, they're not going to buy books. In fact, it turns out that is not true. It is the opposite. Generally, people who check out books buy more books than those who do not attend the library at all. It is not an it is not an and or. It is a and. This is something that actually carries over across all age ranges in terms of both use of bookstores and use of libraries. And it also crosses all socioeconomic issues, as well as generations and other identifiers, I would say, demographics. All of that is very nice to say, and we appreciate you. But what I really want to talk about is some books that we have recommended. I will also say that all of the books that have been talked about so far are available both for purchase in the bookstores as well as in our library. The thing about the library is you're going to have to wait a little bit for most of these because there are hold lists, and that's one of the great things about bookstores is you don't have to wait as much. I'm going to be showing a presentation via PowerPoint, and because the books that I'll be talking about are all checked out, and I don't have the physical books available to me. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. One moment. I want to make sure that this is something that everyone can see. All right. Day Zero by C. Robert Cargill. This is science fiction. My catchphrase here is fuzzy ninja robots. This is action-packed and philosophical. My blurb that I have written out, because I always write out little blurbs for these things. When the results of a legal battle open the door to a robot revolution, Nannybot Pounce watches in horror as society crumbles and a violent uprising reaches the doors of his family's home. When fellow robots demand that he join in, Pounce must choose whether to participate or fight to escort his young charge to safety. This was one of my favorite science fiction books of this year. I would say that it is good for young adults, although it is written for adults. All right. Next, Finley Donovan is Killing It, a Mystery by L. Casimano. This one is fast, fun, and a mystery with great crossover appeal. So after being mistaken for a contract killer, the author, Finley Donovan, considers her options. She's divorced, broke, and about to lose custody to her cheating ex-husband. But what would be really so wrong to take a stranger's money and then take out a bad man? She really can't decide. This one, when I say crossover appeal, there is a lot of humor to this one. And there's great relationships, friendships, and Finley has a voice that we all recognize, although may not admit to. A lot of her perspective is all the things we think and do not voice. It totally recommend for those who enjoy both mystery and a chick lit or romantic comedy. Moving on to Rules for Visiting by Jessica Francis Kane. This was a book that I read a couple of years ago now, and it's really stayed with me. It's one that I recommend to a lot of people. It's in the genre of what we call relationship, which is what used to be called women's fiction. But that is a problematic term, and we have moved on to calling these kinds of books that focus on the relationships between people. It's not necessarily romantic relationships, but familial, platonic. It can also be a romantic comedy and a romantic relationship. Digressing. This is a contemplative tale. It celebrates friendship and family. It's a intimate look. It's gentle. It really lets readers reflect on what's important and what it means to be connected. So the blurb that I have for that one: May, who is 40 and single, decides to address something that is missing in her life, and she begins embarking on a series of trips to discover what is working for other people, and she evaluates roles within marriage and parenting, individuality, joy in the ordinary, and connecting with those around us. I think that this can be read by anyone age level. There's nothing particularly keeping, although because the main character is 40, that may make some people more or less interested depending on where they are in their lives. I had to put in something horror because I feel like the horror genre is often overlooked. It is a smaller genre in terms of readership, but I really wanted to highlight this one, The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher, because it's a great mix of spooky and funny. It brims with paranoia and a single-minded bloodhound. This is a devilishly wicked tale, folkloric horror. It's set in the woods of North Carolina, and it's inspired by The White People by Arthur Machen. So, historical fiction is a hugely popular genre, and this particular one was one of my favorites from this year. It is, I'm just checking my notes here, one moment. The Band of Sisters by Lauren Willig. It follows a group of women from Smith College who go to France during World War I to provide support. And it's told through a series of perspectives within that group. One of the things that I really like about this book is its focus on a separate war era. We have a lot of World War II books, this one World War I, and I think really does what a historical novel should do, in that it makes you want to learn more about both this group, which is a real group, and as well as the time period and the stories behind the story. Moving to The Chain by Adrienne McKinty. This is adrenaline or suspense or thriller, however you want to call it. It is a hugely compelling book. The setup essentially starts with Rachel, who gets a phone call from a stranger saying that her daughter has been kidnapped. They have kidnapped her daughter, and that their own child has been kidnapped and will only be released when Rachel has kidnapped a child of her own. So it creates a chain of kidnaps and crime against children and their parents. The psychological impact of these crimes is dealt with. At the same time, it is a page turner, and you race to find out how it will be resolved. And I will say that it is resolved. No open endings on this one. For something a little more pleasant, we have The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. This is what I call romantic comedy. It takes place in London. Tiffy needs a place to live, and Leon works nights, so they come up with an unusual arrangement and share an apartment and a bed, but never see each other. They communicate via post-it note, and they begin to rely on each other in ways they never imagined, excuse me. It's humor and serious. It's perfectly balanced. I would recommend this for anyone who enjoys romantic comedies, but also this also veers into people who like that relationship fiction as well. Shiver by Reynolds is, I think, my favorite adrenaline for this year. It's a locked room thriller, although in this case, the locked room is a mountain resort. Essentially, snowboarder Mila's biggest rival disappeared off a mountain in the French Alps 10 years before, and she and 4 friends have been invited back by somebody, they don't know who. A snowstorm descends, and the glacier that they are on becomes uninhabitable. They must fight to survive, both the weather, their demons, and as it turns out, something is stalking them, which may or may not be the person who disappeared 10 years ago. And finally, The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. This is relationship fiction. The premise: Patrick, a former sitcom star, has sequestered himself in Palm Springs. He temporarily takes his young niece and nephew in after the death of their mother. And over the summer, Patrick comes out of some self-imposed isolation, and the kids begin to cope with their grief. This is a really witty, heartwarming story. Patrick is very, very snarky, and so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, come for the snarks, stay for the deeper elements, like processing grief and the way loss and grief can impact you long term. This is also one of those that we like to call uplifting books, even though it deals with some serious subjects. My last one, I promise. My Mistress's Eyes Are Raven Black by Terry Roberts. This is set in Ellis Island in 1920. I'm not going to tell you too much about this book because it is a mystery and I don't want to give too much of it away. I will just say that it hits all of the points. This is another one of those books that the history really wants to make you learn more about it. And the prose is really done well for a page-turning mystery of historical nature. Okay. That was a lot. Thank you for hanging in there with me.
Good. I was going to ask one thing. Kate said that she had a lot more, and if she had a couple good ones, I'd love to hear them.
So we got Hench by Natalie Walshatz. It's Lex Luthor's accountant. Basically, goes on a spreadsheet rampage and then tries to take down a bunch of superheroes. We got Olivia Gatlin with Life of the Party. This is another one of my employees' recommendations. She loves poetry, and this is her favorite poet of all time. And that's Sierra's recommendation. We have Kieranisi by Susanna Clark. This one is like wonderful, unreliable narrator. It's very short, but it feels very long, and it's a book that we'll just think about every once in a while. We got a history book, The Library, which is appropriate for tonight. But this is Andrew Pettigrew and Arthur G. Riordan. It will be on the link that we send. But this is so fascinating, just how libraries got started as like private institutions, and then there was things like the Library of Alexandria, and now we have libraries today. And that one is very hard to get. This is probably the only copy that we're gonna have before Christmas. This is Autolengi Test Kitchen. Autolengi wrote Plenty and Jerusalem and books like that are always very, very popular cookbooks, but they have a new one. It's very short, but it's still an Autolengi cookbook, and it will be great for the cookbook lover. This book is gorgeous. It's a Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It's a little novella. I've read it 4 times already. It just came out a couple of months ago, but it's just very restful. It's what's being called hope punk science fiction. So it's basically what would happen if we gave into our better natures and turned away from fossil fuels, started doing renewables, and started respecting each other as human beings and respecting other life as valid. Mycelium Running. I just watched the documentary about this, about the author of this, Paul Stamets, on Netflix, and it was fascinating. So he's actually got a book. I believe he actually lives in Olympia as well, which is cool. I can keep going forever. So, I mean, somebody stop it, just like put the hook up. We got Greg Olson has a new mystery, The Hive. It is, Greg Olson, so it's always going to be very spooky, thriller and atmospheric. And I think we might have signed copies left.
So Kate, I do have a question for you about Greg Olson. Does he ever come by and give talks at the local bookstores? Since he lives in South Kitsap, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's just, I believe, somewhere in Port Orchard or Olalla, but he actually did our very first event from when I bought the store, and it was an outdoor signing at the Olalla Farmer Market. He had a line for 3 hours where people were
For
waiting.
3 hours, my goodness.
The entire time there was people waiting to get their book signed. So that was phenomenal. There's a really cool edition of Dracula that just came out that has little bats on the side and Edward Gorey illustrations. He did some illustrations about it. Edward Gorey is a beloved classic children's author, illustrator, but apparently he did illustrate Dracula as well. So now they have a special edition of it. If anybody has heard of Wonder by R.J. Palacio, it's a very popular middle grade book, but they have a new book called Pony. We have signed copies.
By the way, there's one question here. I don't know whether you'd be a good one to do it or people from the library or who would want to answer it. But is there any, what do bookstore people think about those book limitations in the libraries in Central Kitsap?
Yeah, no, I would love to say something about that.
Okay.
I read a great perspective on this just yesterday. That is, librarians are highly educated people who have dedicated their lives to bringing books to children and tailoring their book collections to children. So to accuse them of deliberately trying to harm the children that they've dedicated their lives to serving is a lot. I think that's a big leap. And then anything that they put in a library might not be for every kid. And if you have concerns about what your kids are reading, they are very happy to work with you and make sure that your kid is getting the kind of book that you're comfortable with and that is appropriate for their reading level. But to say that a high school library shouldn't have a book that is a memoir about somebody's experience that might reflect their own experience, their high schoolers' experience, some of the things that they're thinking about, some of the things that they're hearing about in the news and want to learn a little bit more about, I think is not a great path to go down.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. Sarah, do you want to comment on that? And then Sarah, would you mind adding on just a little bit? How does the library choose which books to put on their shelf? After that would be really interesting to know too.
Sure. I can only speak for myself individually. I cannot speak as representative of the library on this subject. But I personally feel that there are important aspects in libraries and in reading around intellectual freedom that seem not to have been taken into consideration here. And I think if any good can come of this, it is that it highlights how important it is to have processes and policies in place when there are challenges to intellectual freedom. Now, in terms of how books are chosen within the public library setting, it is different from the school library settings. And each library is slightly different, but selectors like myself, who are librarians, have a set of criteria. Basically, we look at whatever is coming out in the publishing world 3 to 6 months out from publication date. We look at reviews, and we look at how it fits within our community. And what I mean by that is, are people asking for it? Is it popular? Is circulation showing that this is something that people will want in terms of like an author or an ongoing series, that kind of thing. We rely heavily on reviews and generally towards star reviews, and then focus on filling in the gaps with what people ask for within the community.
Well, I really appreciate your comments, and I really have enjoyed hearing all your recommendations. Suzanne had to leave a little bit early tonight. Thank you to her. Thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Kate for your very thoughtful and engaging recommendations. As an avid book lover and reader myself, you gave so many wonderful ideas. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But before we close, and thank you also to our KRL partners, Jose and Priya, and to the entire Enlighten board. But before we leave, are there any other questions from the audience? Would anyone like to just speak up and unmute themselves and ask a question? Well,
there was one question, Karen, earlier on, which is asking for a book recommendation for a teen sophisticated reader. It's a good question.
I think Kieranisi would be great because it is so complex, but it is a little bit more digestible, but it has a really fun kind of twist that will be very much enjoyed.
The Firekeeper's Daughter is one that I would recommend. And Kate, can you remind me of the author's name on that?
Yeah.
I can never do it.
Do board. Let me grab it.
Yeah, it is mystery, fantasy, contemporary, slight romance, all of the things, and great actually for all reading levels in terms of high school on up. So I would recommend it to adults as well.
oh, good to know. Thank you.
I was completely wrong on the author. It is Angeline. Sorry about that.
Any other questions?
With more or with the list of books, I can't make a list on behalf of Liberty Bay Books, but they do have these books at their website as well, which is libertybaybooks.com.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. I do want to add as one last resort, if anyone has any requests for recommendations personalized like the one you just got, bookstore owners are perfect people to ask. Librarians are perfect people to ask. From the library side, we have 2 services that we provide, one of which Sarah is very well acquainted with, called Book Match. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, Sarah?
I'm so sorry. You had asked me to talk about these and I forgot. I just rambled. Sure. Book Match is what is an online form-based readers advisory. You sign on through our website and tell us 3 books that you've liked or more, and we provide a list of recommendations based on some of the things that you've liked. The other one that resource that I will mention, thank you, Priya. It is what we call a discovery tool, and it has a lot of great sort of lists and other ways of thinking about books, especially if you're looking for something that is similar to what you've read in the past.
Thank you, Sarah. It's perfect.
Well, thank you everybody for having me. I know that Suzanne was very happy to be here too, even though she had to check out early. So we really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the books that we were very excited for. This year is going to be a challenge to get certain titles, but one thing that we are good at and that libraries are excellent at is recommending books that are similar and will be enjoyed. So don't be scared by the lack of availability of maybe the big name, like #1 bestseller goes out of stock. It's okay. There are other books in the world and in the store. It'll all be okay. Christmas will be great.
All right, well, thanks again. And I think we're about to sign off here and say good night. And we really appreciate all of you who joined us tonight and your interest in our program, and hope to see you again in January. Thank you. Thank you.